Chapter 6. Wanting? Not wanting. My dad and his brothers had built a little cottage on stilts in Rose Island, which was just north of Seaboyne, Michigan. When the road turned north the last 3 miles, we passed migrant housing for the sugar beet industry. The shacks were painted green long ago, and on hot summer days the doors stood open for my eye to spy as we would pass by. Bare as bones. Open stud walls, plywood countertops, and maybe a lone bed in the corner. They were always narrow, 2-story houses. Sometimes you'd see a migrant standing in the doorway, but most times they were little dots out in the fields. Rose Island should have been a paradise, but it was usually scary. Jane and I would often be sent down to the beach alone, where the bloodsuckers and the reeds would usually get the better of us. More than once I was sent back to the cottage for salt so we could remove suckers. We had to fight for a suit that fit and shoes to wear to the beach. We had never heard of sunscreen or a picnic lunch. If we were good, Dad would take us into Bud's Tavern. On the way in the door, Bud had a little educational board in which he had tacked up pictures of kids who had been run over by propeller boats. These kids were sliced from head to toe and most probably died or were already dead. God, it was quite a sight. I would lay awake at night and think about the pictures. Anyway, if you got past the pictures, Dad would buy you a grape knee-high and a bag of made-right barbecued potato chips. Man, that was heaven. It was hard on the belly, but heaven nonetheless. The cottage had a pump that had to be primed when we arrived, with an old 2-seater outhouse. The outhouse was in back by the reeds, and in the spring you felt engulfed in frogs. There were so many, and you were so close to them. I would sit out there for hours, pooping and singing and listening to the bullfrogs. When I was about 6, at least it was before I was 7 and I started swimming lessons, I got another type of lesson. It was late spring, and Dad had several of us out fishing in a small aluminum boat. I was already scared because the motor was so unpredictable, but Dad was confident he could fix anything on the spot, and I was not to worry. Besides, he said, it's usually just the carburetor gumming up. We got out to a sandbar and dropped the anchor and started to fish for perch. In those days, you couldn't catch them fast enough, usually, but today it was a sort of choppy day, and we moved several times. Well, I guess in all the boredom, I decided to say something stupid. I stuck my head up and said, "Someday I would like to learn how to swim." No more had those words passed my lips than my dad grabbed me by the jacket front and threw me overboard. I sunk like a rock, kicking and sputtering all the way down. Much to the bother of my dad, they had to fish me out. Dad tossed me in the corner of the boat and went back to fishing. It seems like we were out there for an eternity. By the time we hit shore, I was frozen solid and could barely walk back to the cottage. I walked in and Mother asked what happened, and as I tried to get off the wet clothes and something warm on, she was told, and that was the end of it. When you hit 7, you could take swimming lessons during the summer months. It must have been paid partially by the school district as part of the curriculum because most of the kids went on Tuesdays and Thursdays riding an old school bus. They must have paid for the bus and the driver, but they always used the oldest, most dilapidated bus on the lot. The driver would take the back way to Carroll, riding along the same twisting, turning, deep-ditched roads as my other car racing incident. There was an old bridge used to cross the Cass River. The river was wide and way below us as we bumped across the bridge, always driving down the center of the bridge as it was so narrow. It was built for horses and wagons, I'm sure. I was always a nervous wreck by the time we arrived to my second horror story, the swimming lessons. Before starting swimming lessons, you had to get a signed health report from a doctor. In the second year, when Mother took me over to the health inspection and card, the doctor said to me, "Well, are you learning to swim?" I said, "No, but I'm trying." He said, "Well, I'm not going to sign this next year if you don't learn how to swim." Oh, God, more pressure. I started to panic right there. All summer I kept thinking I better learn or he wouldn't sign it for me next year. I actually was doing pretty well. I could float, dog paddle, and climb out of the pool. Was that enough for him to sign the card next year, I pondered? Now, today, this day, I remembered they were requiring us to jump off the diving board, and I, of course, did not want to do that under any circumstances. I knew I was going to fail. I managed to avoid the situation until I was the last little victim, student. All the other boys and girls had now changed and bought a snack and were sitting on the bus watching me stand on the diving board refusing to jump. They coached me, encouraged me, and yelled at me, but I stood firm. Next thing I knew, someone was throwing my skinny ass off the diving board, and I fell with all my appendages flailing in every direction to the cheers of the kids on the bus. I hit with a big, painful splash. I managed to dog paddle, climb out, and walk back to the bus dripping wet because they were not going to wait for me to change. So, no snack and a long, cold trip back home. How much longer would this story continue? Would I get to take lessons next year? Would we die in the bus or fall into the river or fall through the rotten floorboards of the bus? Would my dad throw me overboard again? Would I be able to swim then? There was a lot on my mind on that trip back home. The next school year was number 5. I had a teacher whom we called Mrs. Battleaxe. For the life of me, I cannot remember her real name, but she was a real battleaxe. She was quite large-breasted and wore a dress with a classic V-neck. I think she had 5 dresses and wore one each day of the week. She stuffed her Kleenexes down her bra, and it seemed like she had a year's supply in there, and she was a crab. She had kids she liked, kids she ignored, and kids she hated. Poor Freddie Enns was the one she hated. She would just walk by him and cuff him up the back of the head. Dad said Mrs. Battleaxe hated Fred's father, and the sins of the father are always bestowed upon the son. I never thought that was very fair. Mrs. Battleaxe was also stupid. She must have been 65 when I had her, so her schooling would have been at a county normal school, which was a 9-month course for teachers. She and I had a big argument about 0 and 1 being the same during math lessons. I told her my dad said they were not the same, which pissed her off. But she did convince me that day that indeed 0 and 1 are the same and you can treat them the same in multiplications. Well, this basically dissolved any thoughts of being an engineer, not like my father would let me do that anyway. Mother thought women should teach or be a secretary and should never be a nurse or spend time preparing for a man's job. Nurses were there to serve the men and keep them calm, and that was all. There were boys in our elementary school who ran terror over the other kids during recesses. There was one group of about 6 or 7 boys that especially had it out for me. They could punch you and run, steal your ball or jump rope, or threaten to drag you down to the road tracks and leave you there. I was punched a few times, but the worst was playing baseball and getting stuck in the outfield. The outfield was the drain field for the school and was often a wet, soggy, toilet paper saturated mess. But if you refused to get the ball, all hell would quickly break out. So as a girl, you had to deal with the shit if you wanted to play ball. Literally. One day I was crying because I wanted to play ball with the neighborhood boys, and they said no and left me home. Mother came out to the swing and asked me what was wrong. I told her and then added, I hate being a girl and I want to be a boy. She was very warm, caressed my shoulder and said, You'll get used to it. Not very comforting for such a blow to my wishes, but in her fashion very cold and matter of fact. Get used to it and get back to work was her adage. I irritated the hell out of my sister Jane. She hated everything that I enjoyed. I loved playing with a tractor and cooking pots of grass and tracking animals for fun. I ate all the peach skins that we canned. Because I was always outside, I usually had chiggers. Chiggers are nasty little bugs that bite and dissolve your skin for food and lay their eggs. They can itch like mad and leave a nasty red bump. I love my chiggers because Jane hated my chiggers. I would chase her around threatening to rub my legs on her and transfer them to her legs or worse, and she would scream for mother. I was not a fan of sleeping with my sister. She did all sorts of things to aggravate me, just as I did to her. She thought my chiggers were a sign of dysfunction at best and a sign of the devil at worst. If at night she felt anything on her legs, she would jump out of bed, fling the covers back, and spray me with Raid. God, I hated being sprayed with Raid at 3 a.m. It sort of hangs in the air for a while and stinks to high heavens. When we were young, we believed the chiggers crawl into your skin and laid their babies, and then the larvae ate the mother for food. This isn't quite true. They stay on the surface of your skin the whole time in clumps of larvae and eat dissolved skin for food. I was told to put nail polish over the bump and it smothers the larva. That seemed to work, so I always had a bottle of clear nail polish on me. Jane would freak out when I got it out and started painting my legs in dots. I didn't really suffer much or enjoyed torturing Jane enough that I didn't notice the pain and itch. I could keep her away from me with my chiggers and my nails. Jane hated my long nails. She called them talons. They were talons. When you said hard as nails, you would be referring to my nails. She would scream for Mother to cut them. No, my only protection from her and her beatings were my nails. I would push them into her arm until she'd quit whatever prank she was enjoying at my expense. Then she would scream for Mother some more. I made sure I never broke the skin, but I made my point and she would back off. My family was in the habit of blaming whatever they could on the youngest child. Nothing personal, just a place to lay some blame. One time when Jane was being particularly mean, we found ourselves on top of the steps and I pushed her down. Our steps curved to the top, so she ended up hitting the wall at the curve and didn't actually ever fall that far down. Of course, she was pissed and screamed for Mother to come and help her beat me. Mother whipped around the corner, demanding to know what all the commotion was about. Jane said, "Jennifer pushed me down the steps." Mother asked me if that was true. Now, I was blamed for a lot and told I lied all the time. Actually, I told the truth to my detriment many times, and if I wasn't careful, I was going to do it again. I thought for a split second and said, "Yes, I pulled Jane down the steps, but I didn't realize how close to the steps we were." I held tight to that logic, and Mother bought it. Jane was pissed that Mother believed me for once and not her. I got a wallop, but it was well worth the bother. I did feel bad I pushed her down the steps, but only a little bad. After that, I would run down the steps and pat the wall where she hit and smirk a little. I got her. I finally got her. Jane was always in a state of aggravation with me as well as with the family. Life had been pretty good for her as the resident premature baby that Mother protected and fussed over constantly. Mother was not good at preparing her children for future events, and I'm sure Jane had no idea Mother was having another baby when she was pregnant with me. Jane was not given time to adjust. Again, Mother didn't believe a child remembered anything before the age of 5, so she saw no need to prepare a child. Richard had figured out Mother was expecting me. She laughed and said, "He wouldn't walk down the street with me as everyone knows what I've been doing." I was surprised she told me that, but I was over 30 years old when she confessed to his angst. One of the more exciting things to happen that year was the assignment of next year's teachers. I got my sister Marilyn's mother-in-law, Mary Dale. She was so kind. I had been in her house many times, and I loved that old thing. It had a grand staircase that divided the whole house, starting at the front door. The ceilings were tall, and they had wallpaper everywhere. Mr. Dale had an office in the home with built-in bookcases and a sliding door. I was overwhelmingly impressed. I had been in the house when the baby was just walking, fell down the steps. It was quite a scene with blood everywhere, but she was fine. But no one ever forgot it. Mrs. Dale was great fun, and life was different then. Mrs. Dale had a hot wire cutting tool for styrofoam. I don't know where she got all the styrofoam, but we had piles of it. We would sit there cutting and creating for hours, smelling the great plastic smoke that rolled off the hot wire. We did this right beside the exposed asbestos pipe insulation and under a highly flammable ceiling tile. The drinking fountain was filled with lead soldering, and the windows were not all safety glass. My assigned seat on the bus was standing in the aisle, and we could walk home any time we wanted to without a permission slip.